They're serving ghosts, Elias Vance thought. Ghosts of last night's dinner. He sat there beneath Edison bulbs hung low like artificial stars. No one paid attention to the man in the gray beanie cheap jacket and uneven gait who had just settled into the corner table. In front of him, a plate of seared scallop risotto, pan-seared scallops, with creamy white risotto and dill, was set down with a procedural smile from the waitress. Elias didn't smile back. His chin tingled under the fake beard. His hip ached from faking the limp. But what nauseated him most wasn't the smell of melted butter or porcini mushrooms. It was the cold scent of reheated food, masked beneath a glossy golden finish and a few perfectly arranged basil leaves. This was Auden's table, the restaurant he founded, named after his mother. And on that elegant porcelain plate they were selling fragments of memories abused and misused. He raised a spoon. The risotto was mushy, clumping together like paper paste. Gone was the perfect al dente bite, the rhythm of chewing that gave Italian cuisine its soul. The scallops had no sweetness, no scent of the sea. Instead, they tasted dull, slightly rubbery. And the worst part, a thin chill skating across his tongue like a timid confession from some industrial fridge behind the kitchen wall. Apathy has a flavor, and that flavor is a deeply wounding blandness. Elias looked up. The dining room resembled a dream designed by perfection, exposed brick oak floors, flickering candlelight, customers laughing softly, like paid actors trying to forget real life. But his eyes caught something else, a crack beneath the varnish. Clara, the waitress, with neatly tied hair and a rehearsed smile, was pouring water at a nearby table. She stood straight, but the shadows under her eyes were real. Every step, every motion was as precise as a ticking hand, yet lifeless. Elias saw depletion, the kind that never appears on a financial statement. Farther away, Isabel, the young busser, was clearing plates. She moved lightly, almost without touching the floor. There was a faint limp in her walk, barely audible like a breath between symphonic notes. She tried to hide it, like one might tuck away broken dreams in worn-out shoes. A splinter of memory lodged into Elias like aged bamboo under the skin, the first spring rain on the kale fields in Vermont. His mud-covered hands were harvesting their first crop for the restaurant. His mother Auden standing by the wood stove tasting his tomato soup. She said nothing, just nodded, and he had said like a silent vow between them, honest food, Mom. Always. That promise now felt like a torn shadow under artificial Edison light. A whisper floated from the service station, landing in Elias's ear like black ink in clear water. A young staffer murmured to Clara, "Mr. Sterling says we need to push the salmon today. It's been there since Tuesday." Clara said nothing, just nodded, a nod like the oven door closing, sealing away all protest, all doubt. Elias set down his spoon. His heart felt hollowed out by an invisible hand. Not because the dish was bad, but because he had once sworn to a woman sitting by a fire that this would never happen under his name. He left a $100 bill beneath the untouched plate. No one stopped him as he stood. No one noticed the trembling in his hand tucked inside his coat. Outside, the Chicago night air slapped his face awake. Elias stood there staring at the glowing sign, Auden's table shimmering in the mist, golden, warm, beautiful, like a promise he himself had betrayed. He was no longer a CEO conducting a covert audit. He was a son who had disappointed his mother. And the bitterness in his mouth, it didn't come from the food. It came from the betrayal of his own word. The ventilation fan growled like a caged beast. The air was thick, a suffocating mix of burnt grease, dill, and hot metal. Elias stood still in the corner of the kitchen apron, over his black uniform, the name Eli stitched in red thread. Fluorescent light beat down on him, exposing every detail, every sweat stain, every smudge on his shirt, every movement amplified in this unnatural silence. No one laughed. No one joked. The kitchen at Auden's table, once hailed by Bon Appetit as a living canvas of culinary inspiration, now felt like a mausoleum of sound. And everyone in it wasn't cooking with passion. They were surviving by instinct. Miguel, the veteran head chef, handed Elias a crate of arugula without a word. Just a glance, then turned away. His hands were scarred, his back permanently bowed by time. When checking inventory, Miguel stopped at a tray of salmon delivered that morning. He stared at it head low and exhaled not a breath, but a silent curse. The door opened. No footsteps. But everyone knew he had arrived. Mr. Sterling, navy suit, crisp white cuffs, a smile that looked cut from glass. No one greeted him, but every knife chop, every sizzling pan slowed down movements, turning mechanical under his gaze. He didn't inspect the food. He inspected the people. Isabel, his voice velvet over steel. Your pace is slowing down at table 12. If this continues, we'll have to reassess your hours. Understood? Yes, she whispered. One beat of silence. Then he turned away. No one looked at Elias, but he saw it all. Leo, the young dishwasher, turned his face when his stomach growled. No one let him take a break. Peak hour assistant manager Garrett had muttered once without looking up from his tablet. Leo kept a scrap of stale bread hidden under the sink, chewing it so fast it was as if he feared it might vanish. Garrett's smooth face, high and tight haircut eyes that never met yours, marked a new use-by date over a tray of cold cuts. When Elias caught his eye, Garrett only shrugged. A gesture as small and meaningless as dust falling on tile. Elias was assigned to revive wilted herbs. A simple task, soak them in ice water. But when his fingers touched the yellowing mint leaves, they crumbled like dry paper. Leaves once used to decorate the lamb loin with mint yogurt, now nothing but relics. Break time came. No one truly rested. The break room had no windows. The white walls were stained. A mini fridge reeked of moldy cheese. A dented metal table stood with 2 broken chairs. Clara sat there eating cold rice from a plastic box. She ate quickly, silently, eyes fixed on the clock. Tough day, Elias asked, trying to sound light. Clara looked up, a gaze like a half-closed door, not inviting, not hostile. Just closed. Keep your head down. Do your part. It's safer, she replied. Then silence, heavy, wet, suffocating. Clara stood, left her lunch behind, and didn't say another word. Elias remained seated, alone. The hum of the fridge trembled like an unsteady heartbeat. Shift ended. 11:45 p.m. Elias removed his apron. His shirt clung to him like a second skin of sweat and grease. His legs barely remembered how to move. He stepped outside. The cold no longer punished him, it saved him. Miguel stood leaning against the brick wall, cigarette flickering between his fingers. He said nothing. But as Elias passed, he looked up. The look wasn't long, wasn't short. Just enough to say, I know who you are, and I know you've felt it now. Elias nodded, not to greet, but to admit. The real problem wasn't the spoiled salmon, or the expired meat, or the ruined risotto. Those were symptoms. The disease was silent. A silence born of fear, fed by compromise, protected by a system that wrapped oppression in soft corporate tones. And Elias knew to shatter it, he'd need to strike hard enough to bring the sound back. You don't understand, Clara whispered, as Elias slid the tenderloin into the cooler. Tonight isn't like the others. Tonight is the final test. One of the most influential food critics in the city, the kind whose tweet once shuttered a ramen shop in Brooklyn, had reserved a table. Sterling called it a reputation reset, but everyone knew the truth tonight, Even the smallest crack could bring down the whole dam. 5:57 p.m. The kitchen was drawn tight like a bowstring. Knives clashed, pots slammed, and the rhythm of metal was like a prelude to battle. Sterling walked in steps light as a cat, his smile calculated down to the millimeter. "Miguel," he said, presenting a tray of tenderloin, the edges already turning gray. "Trim the borders. Use the center cut for the steak tartare. The critic won't know the difference." Miguel didn't move. He didn't speak. He stared at the meat like it was a sacred relic defiled. His hands that had cooked for 4 decades, froze, gripping the knife like waiting for a verdict. Elias, 3 steps away, held a bottle of white vinegar. His heart pounded like a knock on a door no one wanted to answer. Everything stopped. Everyone pretended to be busy, but every ear strained. At last, Miguel laid the knife down, gently, like placing a sleeping child to bed. "No," he said. "I won't cook that. No shouting, no tremble, just a no clear final like a nail driven into the coffin of compromise." Sterling didn't scream. He smiled, a smile stretched thin like a spider web over an abyss. "Ah, an artist," he said. "Good. You're fired. Pack up and get out." "Right. Now." Miguel didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply gathered his knives into a cloth roll, silent, dignified, like a warrior shedding his armor before walking off a battlefield no longer worth fighting for. Clara, carrying a stack of porcelain plates, trembled. One plate slipped, crashed to the floor, a gunshot in the graveyard. Sterling turned, zeroed in. "Perfect," he snapped. "That's coming out of your paycheck." Clara. Elias stepped forward. Not fast, not flinching, just one step. Then another until he stood between Sterling and Clara, a wall of flesh and silence. His voice was low, no louder than the oven fan. "No, that's not happening." Sterling froze. The contempt in his eyes flickered into doubt. "Excuse me," he snarled. "Who do you think you?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He untied his apron, folded it, placed it on the counter, then raised his hands to remove the fake beard slowly, deliberately, like peeling off a layer of skin he no longer needed. He lifted his head, met Sterling's eyes. "I'm Elias Vance." The name dropped like iron into still water. 1 second. 2. 3. No one plated. No one scrubbed. No one breathed. Just the dull roar of the exhaust fan and a silence so thick every person in that kitchen knew they were standing at a point of no return. Elias didn't say another word. He didn't have to. His name was the bomb. The act of removing the beard, the fuse. Sterling's stunned, wordless reaction, the first detonation. In Clara's eyes, shock. In Leo's, awe. In Miguel's, just stepping through the exit, a flicker of belated pride. Elias was no longer Eli, no longer the stranger. He was the origin, the one who laid the first brick. And now he was the one tearing down the rot in the wall he once helped build. Sterling stared at Elias like he'd seen a ghost, not because Elias was the CEO, but because he no longer controlled the room. The smile on his lips shattered into pieces like the glossy glaze of a porcelain plate hitting the floor. Garrett, the assistant manager, who always hid behind FYI emails and fake calendar blocks, quietly backed away, trying to disappear into the air. But everyone saw it. Elias turned from Sterling as if he were just another irrelevant object in the kitchen. He stepped toward Miguel, now standing at the threshold, knife bag slung over his shoulder, like a soldier exiled from his trench. Elias placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Miguel," he said, voice tight. "Thank you for not forgetting who we are." No one plated. No burners were turned on. Everyone was waiting for a verdict or an explosion. Clara stood still, hands holding a cracked tray of dishes. Her face was no longer the scripted expression of a service worker. It was the face of someone who had just watched the weakest person in the room stand up and do what no one dared. Elias looked around, slowly meeting eyes, nodding once at Clara. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, but her eyes shimmered. The break room. 5 minutes. Everyone. No one refused. The words weren't barked, but they carried the weight of someone knocking on another person's conscience with nothing but integrity. The break room, once a place of escape, now became the most urgent meeting space in Auden's table's history. Elias stood in front of them, no microphone, no slideshow, no agency-approved talking points. He simply spoke. "We've let fear run this place for too long. Mr. Sterling didn't just serve spoiled food. He poisoned the soul of this kitchen. He turned silence into a tool compromise, into standard, and exhaustion into a system." Sterling opened his mouth to object, but Elias met his eyes first. "You're fired," he said, firm. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." A breath escaped from somewhere in the room. Not a surprise. Relief. Elias turned to Garrett. "You knew about the bad salmon. You saw the date labels get changed. You heard Isabel being threatened over her hours. And you did nothing." Garrett opened his mouth, but Elias raised a hand. "I don't need an explanation. You're suspended pending investigation. Whether you get paid depends on the truth." No applause, just eyes, and silent nods. Elias inhaled. "Clara," he said, turning to her, "as of today, you're the general manager of this restaurant." Clara's eyes widened, her mouth faltered, and Miguel Elias added, looking toward the door, "If you're willing, this kitchen still needs an executive chef with principles." Miguel, who had returned quietly and now leaned in the doorway, said nothing. He just placed his knife bag back on the counter. "The last time my mother spoke about tomato soup," Elias said, voice softening, "she said it could fix a bad day. I promised I'd serve honest food. But I left you alone for too long, buried in numbers, projections, and profits." He looked up and met every eye in the room. "Starting today, that changes. We rebuild. One slice of bread, one drop of sweat, one rule at a time." There were no cheers, no chants, just one thing, a different kind of silence. A silence that was deep calm and warm, no longer fear, but rebirth. Sterling and Garrett walked out. No one saw them off. Elias left the break room without looking back. He didn't have to. He knew the stoves were still lit. The knives were still sharp. But the only thing truly honed today was trust. And Clara, one hand resting on the check tray, lifted her chin. For the first time in years, she didn't look down. Auden's table was breathing again. The kitchen had found its heartbeat. 6 months later, a late autumn afternoon. The wind drifted through Chicago's windows, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and dry leaves. Elias Vance stood outside Auden's table like a stranger, gray wool coat scarf, loosely wrapped, bare hands tucked into his pockets. He was no longer a CEO, no longer a man in disguise, not supervising, not hiding, just a man wanting dinner at the place named after his mother. The sign Auden's table still glowed, but the light had changed. It no longer blazed with proud brightness. It had softened like an old hearth fire, warm, steady, inviting. Elias pushed the door open. Inside, the space remained brick walls, Edison bulbs, and polished wooden floors. But the atmosphere had transformed. There was no tense pacing, no silence like a masked face. Instead, there was quiet laughter, cheerful shouts from the kitchen, and the unhurried clink of plates meeting plates. At the small bar by the window, Isabel was serving 2 elderly guests. Her hair was tied neatly. Her steps were still light but now more grounded. On her feet were a pair of navy orthopedic shoes, fitted and soft. Pinned to her shirt was a small badge, "Be proud of your steps." The employee wellness program wasn't announced with posters. No LinkedIn post, no campaign. Just a quiet promise upheld person by person, detail by detail. Elias passed the open kitchen. Miguel was showing a young man how to slice onions into even slivers. "Hold the knife like you hold a vow," Miguel said, not looking at Elias, but speaking loud enough to be heard. Every cut should have a purpose. The young man was Leo now, a kitchen apprentice. Hair tidy, apron, clean, movements precise. When he saw Elias, he looked up and gave a shy but genuine smile. At a nearby table, a customer complained that the flatbread was a bit cold. Clara appeared in under a minute, not with robotic apologies, but with understanding in her eyes. "Thank you for telling us," she said gently. "We'll remake it, and dessert is on the house tonight." No need to ask a manager. Because she held the key, Clara didn't seek power. But at Auden's table, she had something better: credibility. Elias chose a table by the window. A young server brought the menu, bowed slightly, unaware of who he was, as it should be. Elias didn't need to be recognized. "What would you like this evening?" the boy asked. Elias folded the menu: a bowl of tomato soup and water. 5 minutes later, Miguel himself brought the dish. No ceremony, no elaborate intro. He simply placed the bowl on the table, sat down across from Elias, and said, "Your mother's recipe. I only added a hint of thyme." Elias smiled faintly. He picked up the spoon. Steam fogged his glasses. He took a sip. Nothing fancy. No overwhelming sweetness. No trendy ingredients. Just simmered tomatoes, a bit of cream, a hint of garlic, and integrity. A dish with nothing to prove. No need for presentation. No need to be on trend. Just to be right. Elias ate slowly, like a man picking up pieces of lost belief with every spoonful. As he stood to leave, he passed the employee bulletin board tucked away at the back of the restaurant, visible only to staff. A simple A4 sheet hung there. No frame. No decoration. The golden rule of this kitchen: if you wouldn't serve it to your family, don't serve it to a customer. Clara and Miguel, no job titles, just names. Like a promise taped to a kitchen drawer at home. Elias left the restaurant at dusk. Chicago's streets still bustled. Strangers still rushed. But he walked slowly, steadily, as if he were finally relearning how to live. He didn't need to return to the office. No signature was required. No op-ed thank you needed. The real work had already been done. Not through authority, but through empowerment. Not through speeches, but through timely words. Not through campaigns, but through a single bowl of tomato soup. Auden's table wasn't perfect, but it was back on the right path. And sometimes the quietest harvest is the most bountiful of all. Real change doesn't come from a punch or a speech. It comes from doing the right thing and doing it again every single day. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story. Because some stories are meant to be felt and shared.